It's almost overwhelming, isn't it? Just the sheer amount of information hitting us every day.
Absolutely.
And trying to, get a handle on something as huge and complex as the war in Ukraine, figuring out what's true, what's deliberately false. It feels almost impossible sometimes.
It really does. And that exact challenge, finding the truth in all the noise, especially when the stakes are so high, that's what we're digging into today.
Right.
We got some really fascinating materials from a listener, all centered around this theme. Information against evil. They specifically pointed us to a document called ai.against.evil.pdf.
Yeah, I saw that. And the sources they sent cover so much ground: academic seminar notes, news articles, deep dives into propaganda tactics.
Even chats with AI models, which is pretty interesting in itself.
And some really thoughtful ethical points, too. So I guess our mission today is to unpack how information, especially when you add AI into the equation, can be, a force against aggression, against disinformation, using Ukraine as the main example.
It feels incredibly timely, especially with that note in the materials about GPT 4.5 maybe passing a real Turing test.
You mean being indistinguishable from a human?
Yeah. It just shows how sophisticated AI is becoming and, its potential role in actually understanding and analyzing all this information.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. One of the first big ideas that jumped out at me was information as a battlefield. There's a quote here. When information becomes the battlefield, AI must become the shield of truth. Pretty striking.
It is. It captures how modern conflict isn't just fought on the ground anymore. There's this constant battle over narratives, over, what people believe.
The hearts and minds thing.
Exactly. And that's where the potential for AI comes in tools for what the document calls the defense of truth, actively exposing disinformation, specifically about the war in Ukraine.
And it seems AI has a real knack for spotting patterns. The document mentions it can reveal propaganda patterns coming from Russia. How exactly does that work, practically?
Well, think of it like this. AI can process just vast amounts of online text, social media, news reports, looking for signs of coordinated campaigns.
Like what kind of signs?
Maybe a certain explosion of a very specific charged phrase across loads of accounts that popped up recently, or accounts that post at weirdly synchronized times. These kinds of linguistic fingerprints and network behaviors can be, indicators of organized propaganda.
Ah, okay. So it's like a super analyst finding connections humans might just miss in the flood of data. And the point is this helps Ukraine, right? Through multilingual outreach and boosting the voice of freedom.
Precisely. By finding and maybe countering this disinformation, you're not just correcting the record, you're helping build that global support for Ukraine. And being able to do that across many languages is obviously crucial in this global fight.
Okay, so if AI is the shield, we probably need to get clearer on what we mean by information itself. The document offers this definition. Information, a content plus carrier, but information itself is the meaning conveyed. They use a mother calling her son as an example. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So the mother calls his name, tells him to come home. The content is the words, the request. The carrier is her voice, the sound waves.
Right.
But the information is what the son actually understands. Mom wants me home, maybe dinner's ready, or she sounds worried. It's that received meaning, the interpretation. That's the information itself, not just the raw data.
Got it. So it's about the meaning extracted. And then the document talks about information having different levels of complexity.
Yes, and this is really important for understanding AI. Like humans, different AIs can handle information at different complexity levels. The point made is that someone untrained in, say, physics might look at a basic kid's book and an advanced quantum mechanics text and not really grasp the huge difference in complexity.
Just see book.
Right. They see words on a page. And similarly, when we ask a powerful AI, an LLM like GPT 4.5, a question, we might not realize the sheer depth of complex information it's processed during its training to give us what seems like a simple answer.
It's drawing on so much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From this massive ocean of data.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The link between education and resisting evil. The document argues the more complex is information a person can be trained to understand, the less is possibility that the person would stand on the side of evil. That's a bold statement.
It is bold.
Yeah.
But the reasoning presented is that education, especially grappling with complex stuff, broadens your understanding, makes you maybe less susceptible to simplistic manipulative narratives, the kind propaganda often uses.
Like mental inoculation.
Sort of, yeah. More tools in your thinking toolbox, harder to fool you with simple tricks.
Makes sense. So the more complex you're thinking, the harder it is to mislead you. And they apply this to LLMs too, saying they should be against evil by definition. Why?
The argument is that LLMs are trained on data that includes vast amounts of logic, reason, factual information. This is contrasted with the idea that evil usually lacks logical backgrounds. The Russian aggression in Ukraine is given as an example of something presented as illogical, unjustified.
So AI, trained on logic, would naturally lean away from illogical aggression.
That's the idea put forward. And then it introduces this really fascinating thought experiment, proposing we could gauge the educational level and maybe the propaganda resistance of Russian soldiers by seeing if they could understand really complex texts.
Like what kind of texts?
Things like the New Testament in Greek, the Hebrew Bible, advanced math, theoretical physics.
Wow. So the ability to engage with those indicates higher cognitive function, maybe more critical thinking, making them less easily manipulated.
That's the hypothesis presented. The document even suggests that Russian recruitment might, perhaps unintentionally, draw more heavily from less educated populations who could be more susceptible to propaganda and less likely to question things.
Which leads straight into this proposal called Books as Cognitive Detectors of Moral Alignment. It sounds like a research idea almost.
It's framed that way. The core concept is that certain demanding books test specific mental skills, and understanding them might indicate a deeper cognitive capacity and maybe a resistance to harmful, simplistic ideologies. They list 5 specific examples.
Okay, let's quickly run through them. First, general principles of quantum field theory. What's that testing?
High-level abstraction, formal logic, mathematical modeling, basically, complex scientific reasoning.
Then the Biblia Hebraica and Novum Testamentum Grace, the Bible in original Hebrew and Greek, linguistic depth history, but also moral comprehension.
Yet these texts contain intricate ethical systems developed over ages. Understanding them in the original requires grasping historical context and nuanced moral arguments.
Okay. Then permutation groups in math. Pure logic.
Pretty much. Test symmetry, deduction, structural reasoning skills, vital in many logical fields.
And then, kind of surprisingly, Puss in Boots. Why a fairy tale?
That's there to test symbolic interpretation, cultural understanding, how we grasp deeper meanings in stories and myths. Mythopoetic understanding, they call it.
Interesting. And lastly, differential geometry, gauge theories, and gravity. Sounds extremely tough.
It represents some of the most advanced theoretical physics, testing understanding of the fundamental geometric structures of the universe.
So it's not just if you've read them, but this cognitive profiling idea. How would that work?
The proposal suggests asking deep questions about each book, not just what happens, but questions about axioms, about potential moral or political implications of the ideas, really probing for proof of genuine understanding.
And the link is resistance to evil as measured by depth of comprehension. Deeper understanding equals less susceptibility.
That's the hypothesis. They even float the idea of a semantic intellectual scale, and then this vivid thought experiment. Imagine giving these books to soldiers. How many could really engage? Could a propagandist truly grasp quantum field theory? What does that suggest about blind obedience versus independent thought?
It definitely makes you think. The implication is stark. A lack of complex thought might equal vulnerability. And then this radical suggestion, forcing soldiers to study these books after the war as rehabilitation.
It's certainly a strong statement about the power of education, and building on that, they propose a technical implementation using AI.
Using AI to test understanding of these books. How?
They suggest an AI-assisted semantic evaluation framework. The books become prompts for an LLM. You ask it structured questions. Then humans step in to paraphrase, evaluate the AI's answers for depth, accuracy, even moral grasp.
So AI assesses the capacity for complex thought, maybe even moral reasoning, in AI itself, and indirectly helps us think about how to assess it in humans.
Exactly. And it wraps up with a powerful line. The capacity to comprehend complex information is not neutral. It is moral force. In the age of information warfare, understanding is resistance.
That really sticks with you. Okay, shifting gears a bit. The discussion moves to history, comparing 1937 and 2025. What's the core similarity they draw?
It centers on aggression against neighbors and atrocities against specific groups. For 1937, they point to the annexation of Czechoslovakia, Austria, and the persecution of Jews. For 2025, the focus is Russia's aggression, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia.
But the huge difference emphasized is the information explosion, right? 10 to the power of 18 times more information today.
An almost unimaginable amount more. And this massive overload raises big questions. Does this change the potential outcome? compared to the lead up to WWII. Could all this information, maybe even the overload itself, actually help prevent a similar disaster? And what's AI's role in sorting through it?
Right. Can information, especially filtered by AI, counteract aggression and lies this time?
That seems to be the hope explored. The document then restates the definition of evil for both periods, underlining those parallels.
And then it zooms back into Ukraine's current situation, calling it a cry for rescue. It talks about the overload of anti-information propaganda of Russia, Kremlin, Putin. We've definitely seen that.
For sure. And while acknowledging global support for Ukraine, the document voices this worry that the world might still lose this information war. It includes some sharp critiques, actually, about perceived weak or even self-interested responses from some in Europe and the U.S.
So the core question keeps coming back. How can information and AI really help Ukraine in a concrete way?
Well, the next section looks at information suppression, drawing parallels with the Soviet Union jamming Western radio broadcasts like Voice of America.
A classic tactic. And the modern Russian methods listed are pretty extensive: state TV, police crackdowns, blocking media websites.
Miscomnads encouraging denunciations, electronic tracking. The document stresses that significant state resources are poured into controlling the information space and suppressing dissent.
Then the materials categorize different kinds of information relevant in wartime, helpful, ironic stuff directly countering harmful narratives, exposing lies, and even, well, crude humor.
It's a whole spectrum. And one specific, very disturbing piece of information mentioned is finding U.S. parts in a North Korean missile used against Kyiv. It highlights these tangled global connections and the problem of insufficient pressure on Russia and its suppliers.
This leads into discussing information against Trump's peace efforts. It cites a DW report quoting Ivan Preobrazhensky. The argument is that Trump offered concessions on Crimea for basically empty promises from Putin on other areas.
Yes, the analysis presented is that this approach effectively normalized the Crimea annexation without getting anything real in return, and that President Zelensky, given Ukraine's democracy, simply wouldn't accept a deal based on giving up territory.
And Ukraine itself has laid out 5 clear demands for any peace deal reported by The Telegraph. Very firm about no capitulation.
Absolutely. Key points are, based on international law, Ukraine central to talks, warning about Russia's threat to other Black Sea nations if they keep Crimea, and no limits on Ukraine's military or defense industry. They're standing firm on sovereignty.
Then we get a direct example of Russian spin, their foreign ministry, claiming European warmongers are undermining Trump's peace efforts. Classic disinformation tactic.
Right, and the document points out how potent this can be, even if it's false, in muddying the waters and dividing opinions.
Amongst all the heavy stuff, there's also this section on useful information and humor, like German intelligence arresting spies who had a U.S. minister's phone number.
Yeah, odd detail. And then the cruder examples, like comparing Russia to bedbugs, or the sarcasm about Putin offering Russia's resources to end the war he started.
And even that blunt, meme-like line, Trump is a pathetic puppet of a bald rat, is mentioned. The idea being that a flood of even crude stuff can become a weapon against certain ideologies.
It shows how wide-ranging information warfare can be. There's also a sharp quote from Piatkovsky contrasting Zelensky's reception at St. Peter's Square with someone described very unflatteringly. It captures the raw emotion involved.
There's also that very direct claim. Restoring Russia to its original size would solve about 95% of Eastern Europe's problems, called an indisputable truth. That's strong.
Very strong. It's followed by historical context on Moscovia and a critical Nevzorov quote about Russia's negative impact, the reek of war and priests, and internal fascism.
It also touches on more poetic descriptions. Makarich's verse about a violent land, Zeleznov calling Putinism the dry residue of Stalinism. Very bleak images.
Then Andrei Larionov's analysis asks a crucial question. Who enforces any deal with Putin, given his track record? His sobering answer is, right now, only the Ukrainian military. He even suggests the only real Western enforcement would involve a credible nuclear threat. A very stark assessment.
And Vidvud's Beldevs brings up a powerful legal point about Russia's UN Security Council seat. Can you recap that?
Beldevs argues Russia violated the CIS agreements, the very agreements that dissolved the USSR and gave Russia its UN seat. By invading Ukraine, they broke the foundation of their claim to that seat and veto power.
So the legitimacy is compromised.
Legally and morally, according to this argument. The recommendation is for the EU to push for a UN General Assembly review of Russia's seat, forcing them to choose, comply with international law, or face losing their privileged position. It's about upholding the UN's credibility.
That's a fascinating angle. The materials also note about 30 articles documenting discussions about the war with various AIs, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, etc. What's the takeaway there?
It just underscores how AI is becoming a tool for exploring and analyzing the conflict itself.
Hmm.
These conversations show how AI, based on its training data, interprets the situation, which can offer insights.
Okay, now a really central part. 10 arguments for information AI against evil, straight from the listener's sources. Let's hit a few. Number 1, information warfare as a battlefield.
This just reinforces that core idea, AI identifying and countering Russian disinformation globally.
2, real-time witness and historical memory.
Using AI to automatically document potential war crimes, creating an undeniable record.
3, demolition of propaganda narratives.
AI systematically debunking Russian lies, amplifying truth, maybe even sparking dissent inside Russia.
4, exposure of secret deals.
AI potentially uncovering hidden agreements harmful to Ukraine, allowing for public pressure.
Okay, and the other 6 cover things like strategic communication to rally support, clarifying what Russia delenda est actually means, using AI to maybe predict or prepare for Russia's potential collapse, global alert systems, boosting democratic resilience, and mobilizing grassroots resistance. But that last one raises a tricky ethical point, right? Distinguishing legitimate resistance from something else, and when AI should flag activity.
Absolutely crucial. The document proposes safeguards. Clear moral criteria for the AI, source checks, specific triggers for alerts like violence, illegal acts, disinformation tied to hostile intel, incitement. But also vital, human review, transparency, nonpartisanship, and appeal mechanisms.
And that phrase Russia delenda est gets a detailed breakdown too. It's stressed this isn't about genocide, but dismantling the aggressive imperial state.
Exactly. The 10 points clarify. Destroy the empire, not the nation. Demilitarize, depropagandize, hopefully democratize, prevent future wars, recognize collapse is likely internal. It's a moral strategic necessity. It's a blueprint for a new order, and information AI are key weapons in this.
Then there are 10 arguments against caving to Russian nuclear blackmail, basically. Show strength, expose the bluff, strengthen global response, bolster Ukraine, highlight Russia's weakness, accelerate isolation, invest in civil defense, push the delenda est narrative, and use AI strategically. Don't be intimidated.
Following that, 10 arguments for forcing the U.S. to stop any hidden support for Russia. Key ideas. Don't negotiate with blackmailers. Russia broke non-proliferation norms. Victims must be in nuclear talks. Isolate the abuser. Create a pact against blackmail. Maybe cooperate with China. Don't let fear rule policy. Global restraint work before without appeasement. Russia's arsenal is aging. And push for a new treaty on nuclear intimidation.
And another 10 on why anything less than a full Ukrainian victory betrays universal interests. The core is that victory is needed to legitimize international law, ensure European peace, protect the UN Charter, stop nuclear blackmail globally, show democracy can defend itself, deter China, secure food energy, weaken authoritarians. Anything less is seen as a moral and strategic failure.
Finally, 10 arguments for AI itself as a warrior against evil. Things like speed, not being corrupt yet, perfect memory, seeing through noise, supporting the powerless, working 247 across borders, exposing evil in real time, learning and teaching, potentially evolving to defend values, but always, crucially, depending on human guidance.
The materials also briefly mention a peace conference project and journal, suggesting ongoing work here, and then this philosophical kicker, the chicken or the egg question about information and AI intelligence.
Yeah, using the John 1.1 in the beginning was the word analogy. Is information word first or intelligence God? The suggestion is they might be co-fundamental, coexistent. Which comes first depends on how you define the interplay between natural and artificial intelligence. Both are seen as essential.
So wrapping up the main discussion, it's overwhelmingly clear from these materials that information, especially supercharged by AI, is being framed as a vital, active weapon against aggression and lies. We see it playing out in so many ways regarding Ukraine.
Precisely. It's not just reporting, it's actively using information to challenge narratives, demand accountability, and push for a better outcome.
Okay, so quick recap of this deep dive. We looked at information as a battlefield, the importance of information complexity and AI's ability to handle it, the link between education and resisting manipulation.
And maybe most importantly, AI's potential as that shield of truth, analyzing, exposing, and countering disinformation, especially in the context of Ukraine.
And that powerful idea from the sources, understanding complex information isn't neutral, it's a moral force in this fight.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. Think about the ethics, the responsibilities that come with AI playing such a huge role in shaping our understanding of truth, in fighting what's seen as evil. How do we make sure these powerful tools are used responsibly, ethically, for the good of humanity? The materials mention a bibliography, and that Peace Conference project definitely worth exploring further if this has sparked your interest. This conversation is clearly far from over.